I am Jacob, and what you will hear today is one of many stories that happened to me, and no one believed it. Last time I told you about the mysterious priest who uses candy to turn young people into old people, and how I ended up again without a job. But before I tell you what happened to me during that period, let me tell you about another strange and terrifying story that happened to me on the same ship on which the priest was. I don't expect many of you to believe me, because sometimes I don't believe what happened to me or what my eyes saw. Well, let me start. Usually my curiosity takes me to many places, and in that big ship, there were many spaces that aroused curiosity, and one of those places, the interior of the ship, was where the crew rooms were located, as well as vast storage spaces. In those spaces were placed items that the rooms would not accommodate, or some goods that were being transported, or perhaps some personal belongings that needed to be stored in special ways. And sometimes some animals were placed in those spaces. People are often not allowed in those spaces except in very rare cases. On that trip full of curiosities, I was keen to wander between the decks of the ship. The management on that ship was less strict than a cruise ship, and therefore crew members were allowed to be anywhere most of the time. Of course, that was a treasure for me, as I love wandering and I love discovering places. So I was keen every day to discover a new space on the ship that I had not discovered before. One day I was walking around near the storage areas in the ship's interior, and here I felt that I heard a strange sound coming from one of the areas. I thought that there was someone other than me wandering around the place, and I tried to hide so that no one in that area would see me, and in fact I hid behind one of the large boxes. But after more than 10 minutes had passed, and the same sound continued, no one came. I tried to look in all directions and no one appeared, so I tried to focus on the sound. The sound was like murmurs or perhaps muffled crying. I don't know, but it was coming from somewhere. Here I was certain that the person of this sound might be in need of some help, perhaps suffering from an injury or feeling ill. I tried to verify the source of the sound and then started walking to look for this strange and frightening sound. After quite a while and a lot of movement in different directions, I finally knew where the sound was coming from. I was sure that the sound was coming from one of the closed rooms, because the closer I got to the room, the stronger the murmurs I heard became. When I reached the door of the specific room, I found it closed, unlike all the other doors in the same area. I decided to invoke one of the skills that my older brother had taught me before, which was opening locks. It was not difficult for me. After a few tries, I opened the door's lock and I entered. Here I noticed that this room contains many wooden boxes that do not exceed 1 meter, and it is impossible for this sound to come out of them. But when I looked closely, I found that there is something strange about the room. At the end of the room, there are many boxes arranged carefully, as if someone had arranged them in that way to hide something. I'm not lying to you. My heartbeat was audible at that moment, and all that came to my mind was that someone had been assaulted, and then the person who assaulted him left him to die in that room. I then began to think that if I helped this person, perhaps they would accuse me of trying to kill him, I thought. I wanted to retreat at the time, but I was unable to do so and approached anyway in order to find out what was happening. My curiosity was much greater than my fear at that time, and believe me, what I saw was much stranger than all my expectations. Well, let me describe to you what I saw. What I saw was a large cage, a cage with iron bars, similar to animal cages, and inside this cage there was something. The lighting was not good, so I was not able to figure out what the thing was. Who was standing in front of me? Was it an animal or an evil entity or what? But after a little while, my eyes began to get used to the lighting of the place, and here I was able to see what was in front of me. It was a man, yes, an adult man, who was locked inside this box like a ferocious animal. He was very thin and looked very tired. He had thick hair and a long beard, and his clothes were very dirty as if he had been in them for a whole year. As for the smell of the box, it is unbearable. This man has been living and relieving himself in this box since the beginning of the trip. I noticed that there were a lot of empty food cans and a lot of empty water bottles as well. It seemed that someone had left this food and water for him to eat during the trip, but it seemed that he had finished everything. This person was groaning in pain. I did not know what to say, and I could not find any explanation for the presence of this man in this place, but I could not stand without doing anything. The appearance of the man in front of me was very sad. I did not think much, and I didn't wait either. I closed the door and quickly walked outside. I went to bed knowing that if anyone knew that I had seen what I saw, a big problem might happen to me, or I might fall into one of the misfortunes that I seem to attract in one way or another. And when I tried to sleep, I was unable to do so. Whenever I closed my eyes, I saw this man in this cage and heard the sound of his groaning in my ears. I tried to ignore the matter for hours, but in the end I gave up and did what my conscience told me to do. I went to the ship's restaurant and claimed that there was one of the passengers who wanted to eat an additional meal, and I actually carried food and water to this man's place. It was late, and there was no one in the ship's corridors, so I moved quickly without fear to the room where the man was. I entered there and went directly to the cage, and then I placed the food and water on the floor of the cage. As soon as the man saw the water and food, he looked at me as if he did not know what I was doing, and then he headed towards the food with difficulty. It seemed that he had gone days without any food or water, and it seemed that I had just saved him. This is what I said to myself as I watched him quickly devour food and drink water. I stood in front of him and watched him as if I was witnessing one of the wonders of the world. I was fascinated by what I saw in front of me, but I woke up when I saw the man standing directly in front of me and looking at gratefully. Although I felt this gratitude in his gaze, his appearance in general were terrifying and frightening to me. I moved quickly in front of the man after carrying the empty plate in front of him and headed directly to the room in which I was sleeping. And here at that moment, as soon as my body touched the bed, I fell into a long sleep until the next morning. I worked hard all day. The work was a lot and very hard. This made me feel extremely exhausted and tired, and I wanted to go to sleep immediately. But I remembered this strange man whom someone had locked in a cage like he was an animal. I went again to the restaurant and ordered a meal for the man with water, and here I decided to double the amount of water for him so as not to leave him thirsty throughout the day. I actually went again and put the food in front of him. This time he ate the food calmly and in a completely normal manner, unlike the previous day. I thought this was because today was less hungry than yesterday. His looks were calmer and his movements were more natural as soon as he finished. I reached out to pick up the empty plate, and then he looked at me and said, "Thank you." I didn't know how to respond to him. I left feeling very strange because he was speaking in a normal way, and I started thinking about him non-stop. Why would someone treat this person this way? Why would a person be locked in an animal cage? And many other questions running through my mind non-stop. The food order was repeated on a daily basis. I even added some canned potatoes and crackers to provide him with something to eat throughout the day, instead of having him wait for me every evening. One day, as I was heading to the room, I noticed that the room was open, and I began to hear someone talking inside the room. It seemed he was directing his speech to the person inside the cage. His speech was vague and incomprehensible, and I could only hear very few words. He was repeating words like Satan, son of Satan, curse. Of course, I did not understand anything, and when I heard him moving from inside, I also moved to hide so that he would not see me. That's when I saw him from afar. He closes the door behind him and moves toward the exit. I waited several minutes and then moved towards the room. I opened the door of the room and went to the man who was still locked in his cage. He was crying and making a strange sound. When I stood in front of him and put the food inside the cage, he moved so quickly in my direction that I felt afraid and retreated, forgetting that there were iron bars standing between us. I felt frightened by his appearance and the anger that was evident on his face. This is what terrified me so much. He was very different from the person I see every day. He was calm most of the time, and he was repeating some very simple words as if he was a very normal person. How did he change like this? What did the man he was talking to tell him to make him turn like this? The next day, I decided not to go to him. I felt very afraid of him. I ignored my thoughts and the voice of my mind telling me not to leave him and to go and give him food and water. But I did not listen to my mind or my thoughts and went to sleep. I was not able to sleep for a long time, but in the end, I was able to sleep. I woke up the next day feeling upset. I was in a bad mood, and I knew that the reason for that was because I was ignoring the man in the cage. So I decided to go to him as soon as I finished my work and bring him more food and water to make up for yesterday. I finished my work, carried the food, and went to him. He was sleeping on the floor, crying audibly. When he felt that I entered the room, he moved away from the bars and moved back away from me. I felt as if he wanted to tell me not to be afraid of him, and then I smiled and said to him, "It's okay. Come closer. Eat your food." He actually approached slowly, as if he realized that what he did last time was the reason I ignored him yesterday, and that's why I decided to reassure him that I would not ignore him again. So I sat next to the cage for the first time after I put food and water for him and let him eat his food. He looked like he was extreme hunger. I then felt the cruelty of what I had done, so I said to him, "I'm sorry." And here he left his food and looked with teary eyes without speaking. This day I sat talking to him for a long time. I was not talking about a specific matter and I was not saying anything important. I was talking about anything and everything with him, as if I wanted to entertain and occupy his time, even for a little while. I spoke to him repeatedly for several days, until one time I heard him say to me, "Thank you, Jacob." I looked at him in surprise, as if I was asking him what he was saying. I had told him my name a few days ago, but I did not know that he could speak normally. "Yes," I heard him say at once. "Thank you." But it was the only time that I doubted myself that I actually heard him that day. I then asked him, "Do you talk?" He replied, "Yes." I asked him again, "Who put you here?" He looked at the ground and said, "My brother." I said to him, "Why?" He replied, "He thinks I suffer from demonic possession. He says I am the son of Satan." I asked him, "Why does he say that?" He said, "Everyone thinks this. I suffered from illness for long periods of my life. My father used to help me do everything, but when he died, my brother took care of me. But he treated me harshly, and that is why my condition worsened a lot. I began to suffer from strange seizures, during which I lost my ability to function. Communication. I can't speak. I can't express. I can't do anything." I asked him, "Why didn't you go to the doctor?" He replied, "I wanted to do this, but my brother refused." I said in disapproval, "Refused?" He answered, "My father wrote all his property in my name because he knew that my brother would take care of me and would be able to take care of everything well. But when my brother learned about my father's will, he began to hate me and treat me as if I had stolen from him, and that is why he does not want to treat me so that I do not improve and get my inheritance, so that he can continue controlling everything." I asked him, "Where are you going now?" He said, "I don't know. I don't know anything. My brother takes me with him every time, so no one would try to help me and send me to the doctor." I left him that night, feeling a mixture of emotions. On the one hand, I am deeply saddened by his strange condition, and on the other hand, I feel angry at his brother who treats him this way out of greed, and I also feel an urgent desire to help this man. I went to sleep that night thinking about many things, the most important of which was how I could help this poor man. The next day, after finishing my work, I picked up the plate of food and went to feed the cage man. When I approached the room, I found someone standing at the door of the room. It was not the same person I had seen before. He was one of the workers on the ship, but at the same time I heard terrifying sounds. They were sounds of whip strikes and at the same time screams resembling animals calling for help. Then I realized that there was someone beating the man in the cage, and I was sure it was his brother. I did not dare to approach the room at that time and waited, hiding in one of the corners behind the boxes, and then I heard the voice of the man coming out of the room shouting, "Who entered the room? Who gave him the food?" And here I remembered that yesterday I forgot to carry the plate of food, and this was certainly the reason why this man revolted against his brother and beat him in that brutal way. I felt a wave of anger and intense remorse. I was the reason for what happened to this man. How could I do this hideous mistake against this poor man? Here I heard the other person speaking and saying, "No one has the key to that room except you, and no one on the ship knows that your brother is here." The man said to him, "How did this dish get into the cage?" The man replied, "I don't know." The conversation was heated, and it seemed that the cage man's brother had paid a lot to this person who worked on the ship to lock his brother in that dirty room without anyone knowing about it. I waited until they were both gone, and then I entered the room to find the man in the cage lying on the floor, apparently exhausted, crying in a weak voice and unable to move. I put food and water in front of him, and then I apologized to him profusely. He moved slowly towards me and sat right next to me, with only iron bars separating us. I put my hand on his head and tried to console him as much as I could. I realized that at that time he could not speak or deal as he told me yesterday, so I sat in front of him until he finished eating, and then I picked up the plate and moved immediately. Unfortunately, the next day, a big problem occurred between me and the priest that I had previously told you about, and that is why the administration made the decision to drop me off at the first port the ship arrived at. I was not sad about leaving work on the ship as much as I was sad about leaving the man in the cage. What will he do until the ship arrives? Could he die of hunger and thirst, or what will happen to him? At that moment, I made the difficult but necessary decision. I grabbed the food and water dish while praying that the man in the cage was in a good condition to speak, because I had a very important matter that I had to finish as soon as possible. When I reached him, I found him sitting in one of the corners of the room talking to himself. He was directing his conversation to his father and asking him why he did this, why he did not give his brother his right to the estate and wrote everything in his name. Although his speech was very sad, it was reassuring to me. At least he is in a normal state and aware of everything going on around him. I put the food on the floor and passed him water. Then I sat in front of him and said to him, "Listen to me. You are normal now. Let me help you. I can get you out of this box, but you need to go to the doctor. I need someone to take care of you. "Do you know anyone? Can he do this?" He thought for a few seconds, then moved his head and said, "Yes." And then he continued his speech. "I had an older sister, but she ran away from my father and got married at a young age. She died before my father, but she instructed her daughter Anne to take care of me. I love her very much, and I know that she is the only one who loves me, and I'm sure she's looking out for me right now." I asked him, "Do you have her phone number?" He replied, 222 555 389. I wrote the number on my hand and carried the empty plate, and then I went to Jamal, my colleague who lives in the same room as the cleaning team, and asked him how I could contact anyone. He then told me that anyone in the ship's crew has the right to use the phone in the wheelhouse once a week. I did not know this information before, so I was very grateful to Jamal who told me about it. I went straight to the command room and asked to make the call, which I knew only had to be 3 minutes long. Here I gave them the number. The employee in charge of the phone called the number and gave me the headset. When I heard a soft voice coming from behind the headset, I asked her, "Are you Anne?" And she answered, "Yes." I told her everything I had learned over the past period and told her the plan that I would implement. Anne told me that she would come to take him with her and asked me to provide him with a specific type of medical drug that would make him calmer and more aware. I tried to think of something to tell the ship's doctor so he could give me the medicine that Anne told me about, but I couldn't find it, so I decided to steal it. But I don't know how to read, and therefore I was not able to steal the medicine. Here I decided to tell the doctor everything I knew, and although I felt that he did not believe me, he gave me the medicine anyway. Finally, the day came for me to be disembarked from the ship at the port, and here I woke up early and went directly to the room. I opened the cage door as easily as I had opened the room door before, and then I took it from his hand and headed to the doctor's room, who believed me when he saw the man, whose name, by the way, is Blake. The doctor helped me cut Blake's hair and trim his beard and gave him some of his clothes after asking him to shower in order to get rid of that bad smell that had stuck to him for days. When Blake finished showering and putting on clean clothes, he looked completely different. He was a very handsome young man and clearly wealthy. He was naturally calm and poised. No one could see him and imagine what he lived in a cage during that time. About half an hour before the ship arrived at the port, we felt unusual movements around us on the ship. Only minutes later, one of the security men present arrived asking about a person with long hair and a long beard who had escaped from his room. The doctor told him that he had never seen a person with those specifications and asked him who this was. The person, then, the security man said that all he knew that one of the passengers had detained his brother in the storage space and wanted to let him starve to death, but he escaped, and his brother believed that he was a danger to the ship's passengers and might commit a crime, and that is why everyone was looking for him. That was the first time anyone believed me. Fortunately, the ship arrived at the port. Blake and me got off, heading to a cafe. There, as soon as we arrived, a girl in her early 20s quickly approached Blake and hugged him. I understood that it was Anne, who thanked me very much and wished me many blessings. Luck. At that moment, I realized I had done something amazing, and I would keep telling everyone who knew me about it even if they didn't believe me.